Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to discuss Edith Wharton's Twilight Sleep, a novel from 1927 that honestly feels a little too recognizable today. Unlike many of Edith Wharton's better-known works, which famously take place during the Gilded Age, Twilight Sleep is set during the 1920s, and not just in the 20s, but firmly within what is commonly referred to as the Roaring Twenties. And in this novel, we follow a cast of characters who either belong to or are in some way connected to this central blended family. I wouldn't say there's one single main character, but the one that we focus on probably the most is the matriarch, a woman by the name of Pauline Manford, formerly Pauline Wyant. Pauline was originally married to a man named Arthur Wyant, whom she divorced once his unfaithfulness came to light, but before their separation they did have one son together, Jim, and then Pauline went on to marry her divorce attorney, Dexter Manford, and together they had a daughter, Nona, and these two children are now grown up. Nona is very close with her half-brother and his young wife, Lita. Pauline's son from her first marriage, Jim, is incredibly close with his stepfather. Dexter sees him as the son he never had, but then Jim is also close with his father, Arthur, and Arthur is still folded into the mix of this blended family. Even 20 years after the divorce, he has relationships with several members of the family, and they're all very cordial with one another. It's a surprisingly modern arrangement for the 1920s. On the surface, it seems like they're very progressive. But as you keep reading, you see that several members of the older generation, I'm referring specifically to Pauline and Arthur here, they are still very much of the old world. That is still where their mindset is. And so we see them teetering on the edge of this new New York, holding on for dear life, trying to hold on to the way of living they once knew. This manifests in the central conflict of the novel. Jim's young wife, Lita, is a flapper. And even though they have a baby son together, she doesn't really like being married. She wants a divorce. She wants to keep the baby, but then she wants to move to Hollywood and become famous. And pretty much everyone in the family is horrified by this. They're trying to talk her out of it. Except, surprisingly, for her husband, Jim, who seems disinclined to keep her caged up if she's that miserable with him. But really, every character in this novel is unhappy, just in his or her own unique way. This novel was actually named for a then common practice of doctors to load pregnant women up with painkillers, different types of medication, so that they would only be semi-conscious as they gave birth. They would be in this kind of haze, a twilight sleep. And it seems like Edith Wharton wanted to name this novel for the different kinds of anesthesia that all of these different characters prescribe themselves to mentally escape from the prisons that they've built themselves into. There is one character with a drinking problem, and that certainly qualifies, but I think Edith Wharton's grander point here is that sometimes the anesthetic isn't a substance at all. Sometimes it's a pattern of behavior. Like there's one character who loads up her daily schedule to such a degree that not a single minute is left unaccounted for. And so how could she possibly have a moment to spare to consider whether or not she's actually fulfilled with her life? And then more than one character ends up getting involved with entirely the wrong person for them. I think the point here is that these behaviors, though they may not be doing some sort of a substance, they're providing these little hits of euphoria that serve as distractions from whatever these characters are trying to avoid confronting in their lives. Whether that's wanting to feel useful and wanted, wanting to be loved, wanting to hold on to one's youth, or just trying not to morph into your own mother. But to me, the most interesting thing about Twilight Sleep is the way it captures this generational divide. What happens when the older generation no longer recognizes the world that the next generation is stepping into? I think people sometimes forget that even though Edith Wharton is known for the Gilded Age, she was alive and working up until 1937. So not only did she see the Jazz Age, she saw what came before it and immediately after it. And thus, I think she was uniquely situated to write a novel that captures the uneasy handover of the reins from one generation to the next. Every generation is a response to the one that came before it, but I do think there are some generational shifts that are more drastic than others. There was actually a sociologist by the name of Carl Mannheim who first wrote about why there are differences in generations, how growing up around the same time, experiencing the same big societal events, world events, around the same time as other people can foster a similar belief system and worldview amongst generations. And I think we feel that friction in Twilight Sleep because they are somewhat unknowingly undergoing one of those changes. Things are changing so much in the world for these characters, especially for women around this time, that the characters can't emotionally keep up. I would argue that the birth of the machine age, all of the industrial growth that came with that, then the turning point of World War I, along with women's suffrage, made the women of the 1920s almost an entirely different breed than the women of the 1910s. I mean, almost overnight, you go from a woman like Pauline, the consummate housewife and woman about town who is rigid about her domestic and social routines, to a woman like Lita, the stereotypical new woman of the 1920s. Lita is a flapper, like through and through. She is bored almost by nature. She's restless. She's completely disinterested in the life that women before her were supposed to want. She's young and beautiful. She just wants to obey every whim that comes into her brain, which mostly involve going out and dancing at jazz clubs. Basically, she's a young woman who wants to party. She doesn't want to be tied down. And these days, we would just call that being in college. But back then, it was radical for a woman not to want to be a married housewife. But that's exactly the life that Lita is trying to run from. Pauline and Lita do actually have some things in common, though. Pauline comes from new money. She has a humble background. Lita's background is even humbler than Pauline's. Pauline has been divorced. Lita wants a divorce. You would think that they would be able to find some common ground, but they just can't. The way they envision an ideal life is so different. There's actually a really touching scene between the two of them. It's this tender moment when Pauline is trying to talk Lita out of going forward with her plans to divorce Jim. And even though they are agreeing with each other out loud, you can tell that they are never going to see eye to eye on the way a woman should live. That scene, the way those two characters, although they may be trying, completely fail to get each other, in my opinion, perfectly captures the generational divide in this novel. There's like this mental distance between them. There's this bridge that they just can't cross. The older characters in this novel cannot wrap their heads around the way the younger ones think because it goes up against everything they were taught about the way the world is supposed to work. So there is a lot of frustration, a lot of loneliness in here, but also fear, especially for one character, of getting older, being left behind. And one way of trying to deal with that is escaping somewhat into this new New York. I think the generational conflict at the center of this novel stood out to me so much because it rings so familiar. I have had countless conversations with my husband over the years about the disconnect that we've noticed between generations that grew up before the technological revolution, like baby boomers, and then the later generations who either grew up alongside of it, like us millennials, or ones that have never known a world without it, like Gen Z and now even Gen Alpha. You can even see this joked about in memes, like avocado toast and okay boomer, all of these little shorthand ways that we use to try to explain the gap between us. I'm a millennial myself and proud of it. I was an adolescent when the internet was more or less new to the average consumer anyway. And then as I came of age, so did the internet. I got to watch it become normal. And then I got to watch it migrate into everyone's pockets. It's super cool being a part of the generation that I am. I feel really grateful that I've gotten to see all of this take place. But because I did see it take place, I can definitely say that it was a revolution. I don't think anyone can deny that the world was made different because we all have technology at our fingertips. And I think it really drew a line between everyone who grew up before it and everyone who grew up either along with it or after it. And I think the two sides still struggle to understand each other. But back to the novel, because the theme of disconnect is so strong within Twilight Sleep, it's almost purposefully cold. Like there's this feeling of aloofness that is palpable as you're going through the book, and it definitely serves to drive the point home. It's very effective. But it also makes the reading of this book rather uncomfortable. I was physically squirming at times. These characters are so detached from their own wants, their own needs. They can't be honest with each other because they can't even be honest with themselves. So how are they going to be honest with us as readers? And so I found there's a lot of work for the reader in this novel. There are a lot of things left unsaid that we have to surmise. There are a lot of gaps that we have to fill in because there are even events in this novel that take place entirely behind closed doors. Like the climax itself, which is an act of violence that I feel is the ultimate expression of this generational clash. This isn't Edith Wharton's strongest novel in the traditional sense. I don't think it works in the same way that her more famous novels do work. I think if you love some of her more famous works and you come to this one expecting the same experience, you're going to be let down because this is just something different. As I've spent time thinking about this book, I actually have had way more fun chewing on this book after the fact than I actually had reading it. But thinking about it, I think it's one of her more interesting books because it's capturing society in the middle of a transition. And I'm not even sure she could have known what she was experiencing as she was experiencing it and putting it down on paper. This book bottles the complicated dynamics between two generations as values are actively being reshaped by a changing world. And that's just the beauty of Edith Wharton. Even when she's not at her best, she's still great. But those were my thoughts on this book. I would love to hear your thoughts, or if you're interested in picking this book up for yourself, down in the comment section below. If you do want to pick up your own copy, there are links to where you can do so in the description box below. And also in that description box, I've included links to my other videos discussing Edith Wharton's work. I've had this channel for over a decade, and over that decade, Edith Wharton became one of my favorite authors. So if you want to see how I slowly fell in love with the works of Edith Wharton, you can check out any of those links below. If you want to hear my thoughts on one specific novel, I've labeled them all for you down there. And at the very bottom of the exact same description box, I've also included links to everywhere you can find me around the internet. So Goodreads, Instagram, the Story Graph, all the places I'm the most active, in case you want to keep up with what I am reading and doing right now. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.